Right, fantastic. Thanks, Robin. So yeah, as Robin said, I'm a forest entomologist with the U.S. Forest Service. I'm actually part of the Forest Health Protection Group of the State and Private Forestry branch of the U.S. Forest Service. And I'm located in Durham, New Hampshire, which is here. You should probably see it now on the slide. It's kind of all the way over on the Atlantic Ocean, but we service the 6 New England states and the state of New York that you see on the image here. And we've been working on emerald ash borer since about 2009 with our first detections in Western New York. I've done a bit of applied management research along with providing a wide range of technical support to federal, state, university, and tribal partners in the region. And I continue to work closely with these partners in detecting and managing emerald ash borer. For today's talk, I'm going to kind of broadly focus on how we've been approaching emerald ash borer in the Northeast. I'm not going to really talk too much about any particular research projects that we've done, but more of our approach on managing emerald ash borer in general. So despite its long history of colonization, fragmentation, major cities and ports here in the Northeast, all of which promotes non-native forest pest arrival and establishment, much of our area is still heavily forested. In other parts of the country, I think when people think about the Northeast, they think about large metropolitan areas like Boston and New York City. However, 80 to 90% of our land area is still forested here in New England. And our forests are pretty diverse. It's kind of what you'd find kind of typical of forests along the northern tier of the U.S. They include an ash component, which combined with their proximity to ports and urban centers, it really compounds the likelihood of pest establishment in our region. This is a few years old now, but you can see from the FIA data that similar to Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, there's a lot of ash that's present in New York and New England. White ash, green ash, and black ash are our primary native ash species, with much of New York State having higher densities of ash, similar to the lake states, but compared to our 6 New England states or parts of the Adirondacks in upstate New York. Ash makes up about 4 to 8% of the northern hardwood forests in New England, but as many of you know, ash tends to be clumped in distribution and can be much higher concentrations in certain areas. Similarly, thanks to its popularity as a landscape tree, many towns, municipalities, and developments in the region are highly stocked with ash. It varies from town to town, but some urban canopies here in New England are very heavy to ash and are going to require significant treatment or removals and replacement as they become infested with emerald ash borer. So not only is there a lot of urban forest canopy, but our urban centers in the Northeast are really distributed across a forested landscape. This is just an example of a town here in New Hampshire, and you can kind of see we just have the urban area in the sea of trees. As a result, these large forested areas tend to be in very close proximity to densely populated areas, popular event destinations, and centers for manufacturing, trade, and commerce. This increases the threat posed by invasive insects like emerald ash borer to our forests. This picture is from the New Hampshire Motor Speedway, and you can see it's very popular. It gets thousands and thousands of people coming each year to a couple of the races, and it's really it's our most popular camping destination in the state. And you can see we're in close proximity to diverse northern hardwood forests. And in fact, that's one of the spots that we found emerald ash borer fairly early on in the state of New Hampshire. Presently, emerald ash borer has been detected in 35 states and 5 Canadian provinces, for those of you that are keeping track. If you take a closer look, much of the Northeast is currently regulated for emerald ash borer, with several significant detections having occurred just in the last year, such as new state detections in Vermont, Maine, and Rhode Island, and new province detections nearby in New Brunswick, which is kind of at the tip of Maine there, and Nova Scotia, which is just off this map, just to the east of Maine. And of the 4 new states that had new EAB detections in the last year, 3 of them were here in the Northeast. Vermont was number 32, Maine was number 34, and Rhode Island was number 35. Plus, we had the 2 new Canadian provinces as well that were nearby. So lots of changes in the last year here in the Northeast when it comes to EAB and EAB regulated areas. But regulated areas really only tell part of the story when it comes to emerald ash borer. So I wanted to kind of take a step back and give you some background on how we've been looking for emerald ash borer infestations for the last 10 to 15 years here in the Northeast. So early on, like many places without emerald ash borer, our emphasis was on detection surveys, outreach and education, and preparedness planning. We utilized multiple detection tools in our effort to broaden our monitoring footprint and really increase the likelihood of an early detection. Those detection tools have included the purple panel traps, and now the different colors of purple panel traps, as well as girdled trees, double-decker traps, now green funnel traps, and the image you see all the way to the right is Cerceris wasp. That's a native buprestid hunting wasp that goes after things like emerald ash borer, and those colonies can be monitored to see what kind of prey the wasps are bringing back. We've been doing these, for the last 10 years. Each of them has pros and cons, and efficacy varies depending on which tool we're using, but we figured that we'd be better off using as many of the tools at our disposal as possible. As a result, we've had detections made with each of these tools really over the last 10 years, and we continue to monitor the expansion of EAB infestations in many areas, even within the regulated zone for emerald ash borer. So this is a map. It represents 2009. The EAB invasion of the Northeast really begins in 2009 in western New York State. And here the red area denotes a 5-mile buffer around emerald ash borer detections and represents the area that is what we consider highly probable to be infested or to become infested in a very short time frame. And then the orange or yellowish area on the outside of that is simply an additional 5-mile buffer that we use to consider at risk for natural spread of the infestation. And it kind of is an area that warrants some management consideration for landowners and property owners in that zone. We kind of progress from 2009. The next year in 2010, you find we've got more isolated infestations that are detected in western New York. Also in Canada, kind of near the border in upstate New York, and in our easternmost detection in the Hudson River Valley, south of Albany. This coincidentally coincides with the year that I was hired by the Forest Service. So about the time we found that infestation in the Hudson River Valley, I was probably halfway through New York in a U-Haul van on my way to Durham. But that's just a coincidence. By 2011, we see we've got expansion of these infestations that's occurring. Some of this is actually the result of more thorough delimitation surveys that we did and enhanced monitoring around areas that were high risk or nearby other infestations. 2012, we pick up the first detections in New England, with Massachusetts and Connecticut both finding infestations in their states. 2013, you're seeing a lot of isolated satellite infestations in the region at this point, and expansion of some of the ones that were more established or established for longer periods of time, like in the Hudson River Valley in Western New York. Also, New Hampshire joins the ranks of infested states. 2014, more of the same, expanding infestations, a few new satellite infestations occurring. 2015, same thing. By 2016, we've got many of the isolated infestations are starting to coalesce and are becoming generally infested areas. So parts of Western New York, kind of the greater Hudson River Valley, in southern New England. By 2017, we've got expansion, but not really any new significant detections occurring. But in 2018, we've got the new detections that I mentioned that happened in Vermont, in Maine, and Rhode Island. Some of these were from natural spread. So like the one in southern Maine looks like it was natural spread from our infestations in New Hampshire. But others are from people moving infested material to new areas that were previously uninfested with emerald ash borer. Some of the spots in Vermont were clearly moved by either people taking recreational firewood up to a campground or a hunting camp, those kind of things, and then not using all the wood and beetles becoming established. The one up in northern Maine was actually, I think that was established on the other side of the border in Edmundston, New Brunswick. And when we found out about that find, we went up. There's just a river that separates the two at the border there. And we started looking for ash borer right along the river. And we found it the evening that we got up there. So it looks like it just kind of spread across the river in that case. So even though much of the area is now regulated for emerald ash borer, the Northeast is still what I consider on the leading edge of the emerald ash borer invasion. And it's really characterized as a mix of expanding satellite infestations beyond generally infested areas and large areas and ash resources that are without EAB infestation. So like many of you, our state and tribal partners have often have limited resources for responding to emerald ash borer and benefit greatly by assistance from other agencies within their states or in nearby states. You know, 6 New England states are pretty small in size compared to some of the states in other parts of the country, and we have some, small limited personnel in some of our agencies, and so we try to work across state lines as much as we can to assist each other. So in this vein, we have generally approached the emerald ash borer invasion as a kind of a multi-agency team within each state. So typically in each state, we form these EAB Taskforces or unified commands. We call them different things, but it's basically a group that's represented by the U.S. Forest Service, APHIS. That's usually the state plant health director is a representative in that group. And then we have the state agencies. We have both the State Department of Agriculture, which is generally the state plant regulatory official. That's a representative in that group. And then we have the State Department of Forestry or Natural Resources folks. Usually their forest health director is part of the group. And if we have a strong university cooperative extension program in the state, then they often are at the table as well to do some of our more serve as like public information officers and things like that, or to deal with websites and those kind of activities. So beyond limited personnel and resources in the Northeast, the purpose has really been to develop a coordinated response. Knowing who does what and having all these different agencies kind of speaking in one voice. And I think the benefit, it's been very beneficial for us. It's made for a more balanced approach to managing emerald ash borer. We don't have agencies that are kind of contradicting each other. And all partners are involved in press releases, town hall meetings, and pretty much any opportunity to talk about like a new detection in the state when we're talking to the public. So there's no one agency that's ever kind of on the hook to discuss it all. We kind of approach it as a team. So one of the things that we've encouraged is for a state to decide on one primary emerald ash borer webpage to be the clearinghouse of all things EAB in the state. And the idea is that it simplifies the message to the public. And as long as the website is nimble and can be readily updated, it makes for a more comprehensive information source for the people in that state. So this is an example of Vermont Invasives web page and the emerald ash borer page that they have as part of the Vermont Invasives. And it has all sorts of the maps, where emerald ash borer is. It has management zones, recommendations, how to identify EAB, how to identify ash trees, all sorts of information can be on that. And when we have it all on one web page, we don't have to worry about one agency having certain information up and another agency having other information up, or contradictions, or things getting posted before the other one does. So it really helps time-wise to be one comprehensive source for information. So usually we get these task force kind of pulled together before an emerald ash borer detection, and prior to an EAB detection, preparedness activities may include things like tabletop exercises, coordination of detection surveys, development of outreach materials, websites, etc., and really drafting things like key messages when you find emerald ash borer, notification letters that are going to go out to either towns or tree wardens or industry or affected stakeholders. Having drafts of all those things are really, really beneficial to be able to hit the ground running when we actually do find emerald ash borer in the state for the first time. Another important thing is just really getting everyone on the same page in terms of the chain of communication and the process following an emerald ash borer detection. It just makes a response that much more coordinated, allows you to really hit the ground running when a detection is made. Another benefit of running through scenarios at tabletop exercises is that it brings up a lot of questions to answer. And it's really better to do that ahead of time than when you're in the thick of it, and you have people maybe stepping on each other's toes, or doing same thing and not making the best of the resources that we have available. So really having things like a website that can go live and drafts of key messages and press releases is priceless for this kind of effort. So following detection, confirmation and press releases, etc., usually what we've done in the Northeast is we've followed that up by delimiting the infestation to determine the size of the infestation and inform regulatory and management decisions. I know this isn't done everywhere, but here in the Northeast, we've put a lot of effort into doing this. This happens most often with a new state detection or in areas where we have valuable ash resources and affected stakeholders, such as tribes with that may suffer severe cultural impacts from the loss of ash. And these delimitation surveys have varied depending on the timing of its detection, the resources, goals, and objectives, but have often involved tree sampling along transects or on a grid network, like a quarter-mile grid over the affected area or some such thing. But usually it involves sampling a lot of trees. So the number of tree samples has varied depending on the time of year we find it and how quickly we need results. You know, if we can get girdled trees established and wait for a summer for some really good intensive information with girdled trees, we do it that way. If not, if time is of the essence, we just sample more trees that are non-girdled. But ultimately, we're sampling a lot of trees, both girdled and non-girdled trees, in a lot of these locations. And when you're lucky, sometimes it's dry and it's really, you know, pretty nice areas to sample trees. Other times it can get pretty wet and sloppy, and it seems like if it's not hot, it's generally exceptionally cold. But it always results in logs that we need to carefully debark. Sometimes it's hundreds of logs or even sometimes thousands of logs. A lot of careful labeling and lots of peeling. Sometimes we're fortunate enough to do this in state facilities. Other times it's occurred in private landowner facilities that are nearby. Sometimes it's in garages. Basically, anywhere to work in a safe, comfortable location. You know, the opportunities have been a lot of work, but incredibly worthwhile, not just in terms of informing management and regulatory decisions, but as teaching opportunities to bring people together, often diverse people together with a common interest and goal. People still assist to develop professionally and to learn new skills that they can use in the future. But more and more I'm finding that we're even getting experienced people that are coming out to assist and are finding value in contributing their expertise and knowledge to some of these operations. So these events can attract a lot of attention. We've had state foresters and commissioners that have come out and peeled logs with us, sometimes for days at a time. We've even had a governor stop by to learn more about one of these operations that we had underway. You know, so it can attract a lot of interest and attention from your agencies. And usually we're looking at for the edges of the infestation, not the heart of the infestation where we have you know, readily infested trees that are obvious. Usually it ends up looking more like this. If we're lucky, we start looking and finding only 1 to 2 larvae per tree. Sometimes they can be really small. This one has got a second instar that's circled, but kind of just below and to the left of it, you can almost see there's another gallery, another L2 gallery that's still under some of the phloem tissue. You know, so people learn a lot in terms of how carefully they have to debark trees, how far they have to peel to be able to find these small larvae, and really finding the true edge, or at least as true as we can discern of an infestation, is the goal. Some of these larvae are so small that they can be covered up by a coin. So careful debarking is a must, and we oftentimes have quality control where, as you get new people peeling trees, that they have to run it by a more experienced peeler to make sure that everything's peeled down to the right level. So even after training, there's kind of quality control in place to ensure that we're getting really good information on our infestation. So here's an example. This is a delimitation that went out 5 miles from our known infested trees, and gave us a good idea of the extent of the infestation. So knowing this, regulatory decisions could be better informed and management recommendations could be provided. This map was providing guidance on where insecticide treatments might be warranted within 10 to 12 miles around the infestation. And knowing the emerald ash borer densities, that informs where various management tools might be most effective at reducing growth and expansion of the infestation. So this just shows you that kind of that blue outer ring are the lowest densities of emerald ash borer. And as you get more in the middle, you kind of pick up some hot spots that are in red and orange. That's where we had the highest densities of emerald ash borer at this infestation. And we use the same tools that many of you are familiar with, including targeted ash removals, releasing biological control, or encouraging more woodpecker foraging of the EAB infestations. We use girdled trees oftentimes, not just for monitoring tools, but we also use them as a management tool where we can use them as population sinks or maybe even direct the spread of the infestation. And then also insecticide treatments, especially in landscape trees, are some of the tools that we utilize depending on the site and where we're working. So often we've used the incident command system for these various operations, whether it be for felling trees or some of the sampling, survey, and so forth. It's the incident command system has really provided a framework for the multi-agency response following detection of emerald ash borer. And the goal is to maximize our efficiency in determining the size and extent of the detected infestation using the resources of the participating agencies. It can be, ICS can be very efficient and really leverages the resources we have available. So usually what we do is we create what's called an incident management team that's we assemble to conduct the initial survey, messaging, and outreach following a detection. And after the delimitation survey, the kind of interagency oversight committee or unified command discusses our options based on what we found, and we determine the next steps to the response. So if you just look at the structure of ICS and unified command, usually what it is we have the agency administrators or representatives. So here we have the 4 main groups, the 2 federal agencies, the U.S. Forest Service and APHIS, as well as the 2 state agencies, the Department of Ag and the Department of Forestry or Natural Resources. That kind of makes up our unified command. And then we have an incident commander that we assign, and that person assigns safety information and liaison officers. And within the command of the incident commander, he has kind of 4 main departments. He has planning, logistics, operations, and finance. So planning takes care of resources, documentations, when people are arriving, that kind of stuff, when we demobilize, when we get started. And it also involves technical specialists. For logistics, those people are in charge of finding the facilities and the ground support and making sure that we have good communication, medical and safety things are prepared and available in case something happens. A lot of the areas where we work, we don't always benefit from a good Wi-Fi network. So communications via cell phones don't always work, and we have to rely on radios or some other kind of communication in some of these areas. Then the operations folks, they kind of oversee the survey and any regulatory issues that might come up, and also includes technical specialists. So some of the APHIS people might be technical specialists for the regulatory work, whereas some of the rest of us might be more familiar with the field operations and assist with the survey. And finance, if there's money, or even if there's not, we have kind of a finance department that takes care of handling whatever finances we have. So if we have a budget, great. If not, then we do things within the cost that each agency is willing to do. So all the gathered intel is moved up the chain to the incident commander, who then takes it to the unified command process and direct the incident commander on the next steps. This usually happens every day, if not multiple times in a day. So really the unified command who's making the decisions gets the information as quickly as possible. And this structure is really beneficial because a lot of the forestry personnel in the states are familiar with ICS already, and can fill prominent positions. They're familiar with it because a lot of them also do fire deployments, and this is used oftentimes in fire deployments out west. So they're really familiar with it. And one of the greatest benefits, in my opinion, with ICS is that it's flexible, and it can really be as large or as small as needed depending on the project or the resources that you have available. So here in the Northeast, we have the Northeastern Forest Fire Protection Compact. Mike Bona from the U.S. Forest Service and Dave Struble from the Maine Forest Service a few years ago were instrumental in working with the Fire Compact folks in establishing a forest health working group within the compact. It really makes it easier to fund cross-border assistance than just relying on your agency to get permission to come over and help with a forest insect project. And I know a lot of the forest fire protection compacts in other parts of the country are looking into this, and some of them have recently established forest health working groups as well. We've used it here in the Northeast for deployments on insect projects such as southern pine beetle, Asian longhorn beetle, and of course emerald ash borer. Recently we had a large EAB Delimitation Survey with the St. Regis Mohawk tribe in upstate New York, and we had people that came from Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire that came to assist with that deployment. Really made it a lot easier when you have very limited personnel to deal with projects. So one of the things that I wanted to touch base on was this possibility about losing emerald ash borer quarantine. I imagine most people on the call are familiar with this idea of potential federal deregulation of emerald ash borer and what it may mean. So if you look, back at the Northeast, we've got a lot of large regulated area, but it's really a mix of infested and non-infested areas, as I showed you earlier. And our approach has been to think about quarantine as one of our management tools. It's not really one or the other, but it's the two things working together, where management can affect the local EAB population dynamics and really affect the short distance spread of an infestation or the growth of the infestation, whereas quarantines help reduce the long distance human assisted movement of emerald ash borer while still facilitating safe trade through compliance agreements. But really the point is that we've been trying to think of quarantines as just one of our management tools here in the Northeast, and as such there's really an evolving role of quarantine. Quarantine is really most effective when we have EAB populations that are low density, or our populations are in isolated satellite infestations. Human-assisted movement is still an important factor for creating or spreading emerald ash borer, and we have activities underway to help manage EAB impacts. So there's still value in slowing down the spread. So when we think of it in these terms, it's more readily obvious that the role of quarantine evolves over time. You know, we know that emerald ash borer doesn't stay this way for long. You know, populations, even with our management tools in place, still tend to grow at an exponential rate, and natural expansion of the population changes over time. So you get something like this. You know, what we've explained here has occurred in the Northeast, where we've got natural expansion, like if you look at the infestation in southern New Hampshire, it's now naturally expanding into parts of southern Maine. And really, if and when we lose the federal quarantine, we're still left with this need to manage emerald ash borer in the region. So, you know, management is still important, and we've been trying to prepare for losing quarantine as one of our tools. But with it being a tool that's been evolving for us since 2009, its potential loss hopefully will not be as detrimental as it might otherwise be. You know, this is an example. This is just NH Bugs. It's the main webpage for New Hampshire. New Hampshire recently went statewide last fall with their emerald ash borer quarantine after keeping the quarantine small for nearly 6 years. And the multi-agency task force continues to provide information on compliance agreements, management zones, best management practices, and so forth at the site that we had originally set up before our EAB detection happened in 2013. So it's really preparing for what's next. It's continuing outreach and education on managing emerald ash borer as well as other pests. A lot of these websites, as you can see, you know, folks started with emerald ash borer, but then have picked up links to other pests of interest in the area. But having a one-stop shop that isn't just good through the initial detection and management, but kind of continued management of emerald ash borer is really important, and it really helps provide a way to have this consistent messaging from all of our partners. You know, we also have spent a lot of time preparing outreach for municipalities, not just during the infestation, but even afterwards, and includes things like direct mailings to town offices and a lot of presentations to at town hall meetings or municipal associations. The forest industry is a critical partner. So, you know, we continue to prepare information about interests for the forest industry, you know, how they can move wood safely from infested zones within the regulated area, or afterwards if we lose federal deregulation or federal regulation of emerald ash borer. So these are just some examples from some of the options that we've prepared in Vermont for slowing the spread of emerald ash borer when moving ash from the infested area, as well as processing options to slow the spread of emerald ash borer. And we have regional coordination now that we're kind of underway trying to prepare for the loss of the EAB quarantine and having larger regional recommendations that all reflect one another. We also have put a lot of work into firewood best management practices and reaching out to firewood producers. Many of the local firewood producers really want to be part of the solution and not contribute to the EAB invasion. A lot of, at least in New England, many of them aren't moving wood beyond 5 to 10 miles from where it's processed. A lot of them have the ability to separate out ash or collect ash or harvest ash at different times of the year. So when you're within a large quarantine area, there are some options for developing best management practices that are beneficial for not being part of the problem with spreading emerald ash borer. And recreational firewood still remains a difficult pathway to target for outreach and education. But attempts like this one, where New Hampshire and Maine, along with a few other states in the country, have started using Firewood Scout. Attempts like this are really incredibly valuable, I think, for making it easier for campers to get wood that's nearby where they're going to burn it and not be tempted to grab the tree they had to cut out of grandma's backyard because it died from emerald ash borer, and they think it's safe and they take it up to one of their favorite recreational spots. So we continue to work a lot with recreational firewood here in the Northeast. So the attention that these partnerships have generated has led to quite a bit of recognition within various agencies, and sometimes the agencies have received merit awards or at least recognition in some of the cases. This image is just from a delimitation survey that we finished a few weeks ago with the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. Everybody's happy because it's the last day and we all have our fingers and sampled a bunch of logs. One of the more unusual events took place recently in New Hampshire. It was Emerald Ash Borer Days at the local minor league baseball team. And it was really a great opportunity for outreach, and the unified command. So all those different agencies were called out onto the field and acknowledged, and it was kind of a unique opportunity. Emerald ash borer threw out the first pitch of the game, and later an emerald ash borer got bashed by the mascot at our EAB display in the stadium. And really, the multi-agency approach has been extremely effective way to coordinate the response and messaging for us in managing emerald ash borer here in the Northeast. It's really led to opportunities for diverse groups to establish or renew relationships, and I think it better prepares us for the forest pest issue, whatever that may be, that comes next. So it's been really valuable to bring these different agencies and groups together to work as a common goal and a common cause. So that's kind of our approach to emerald ash borer in the Northeast. The bottom line is that emerald ash borer continues to be important, or you could say as important to the people here along the leading edge of the invasion as it was when we first detected it in North America in 2002 in Michigan. And important stakeholders, including landowners, municipalities, and tribes, see value in continuing to manage emerald ash borer. And hopefully the experience we've gained in the region over the last 10 years is going to benefit us for the next 10, even as we look to sustain ash dynamics after emerald ash borer invasion. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Robin and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nate. This has been really informative. It's kind of nice to see the different efforts that have been taking place there, and to see that some of these things are really getting out there to the people who need to see it. Cliff Sadoff says first he says, nice cover slide. He liked your cover slide as well, as I did. In an age where traditional media, newspapers, TV, etc., is being exchanged for social media, could you explain if or how you modified your press release process to reach your target audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, our state partners have done a good job in using social media to get information out, not just about emerald ash borer, but You know, you have to kind of use a broad approach when keeping you know, posts fresh and interesting. You can't just say, oh, hey, we found another emerald ash borer infestation. You know, so they oftentimes open it up to wider invasive species pests. In terms of announcing like a new state find, you know, we've stuck to traditional press releases as our primary mode, but I know that those then are picked up in a lot of the social media feeds and are distributed to a broader audience that way as well. So, and a lot of that happens by our state agencies or some of the other groups that are closely following the invasive species.
Okay, thank you. Would you recommend ash peeling events as a way to garner support for your outreach? Do drop-by celebrities and officials take advantage of their participation to seem woodsy or invested in the problem?
Yeah, I think there's some of that. You know, usually, you know, when I'm involved, my goal is to really focus on getting the work done. But there is always, you know, it is interesting if like the governor shows up, and then you kind of you want to make it be nice and informative for that person and not just the people that are doing the work. So a lot of times we can use that to our advantage. You know, other times, even if we don't have, you know, somebody with notoriety show up, we still do local press releases about the activity. I'm thinking the one we just most recently did with the St. Regis Mohawk tribe in New York. You know, they put out information continually about the status of what we were doing with the delimitation survey, what the results were, how people could help, how they could volunteer an ash tree, all sorts of things like that. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to use events like this to increase awareness and in some cases buy-in to what you're doing when people start to see the value of it.
Okay, that sounds good. Appreciate it. That's it for all the questions at this point. Thanks for putting down your email address, and I also will send that out with the email that you all will be receiving tomorrow with the survey and the other information. Oh, I have another one here. Frederick says, have you noticed any buckthorn issues underneath mature dead ash canopy in the northern regions?
Yeah, you know, some of our research is looking at, you know, the silviculture of ash and ash dynamics and aftermath forests, and I didn't really cover any of that today, but certainly in some areas where we have a lot of invasive species, we have issues with ash regeneration following the invasion, or if there's a harvest, like a salvage harvest, to remove some of those infested trees. You know, sometimes it's things like Japanese barberry or honeysuckle that might be really thick in the understory. We've had cases in the Hudson River Valley where we get like Japanese stiltgrass that comes in and is just like thick as carpet, and you can't get any ash regeneration through it. So in cases like that, we've got to develop more of a regeneration plan and go into that stand following harvest or EAB invasion to do some kind of invasive, you know, plant operations.
All right. I do not see any other questions or chat at this point. And again, Nate's email address is there on the slide if you want to write that down, but you will also be getting that in the email that you will get tomorrow. This webinar is being recorded and will be playing on the, you can watch it later on the emeraldashbore.info/EAB University page. So thanks again, Nate. This has been great. It's good that you could update us on what's going on in the Northeast. And everyone, thank you for attending. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording, and I will be closing the meeting. Thank you again.